My husband wiped a bead of cold sweat from his brow as my navy blue carry-on suitcase slid into the dark tunnel of the Federal X-ray machine. His knuckles stretched taut and pale against the edge of a gray plastic security tray. He was holding his breath, his eyes fixed on the scanner monitor. He was waiting for the blaring sirens. He was waiting for armed customs officers to tackle me to the cold airport floor, pinning me down for an international crime that carried a lifetime prison sentence. He thought he had engineered the perfect betrayal, framing his devoted wife for his own corporate treason so he could escape to a tropical resort with his 27-year-old executive assistant. What he failed to realize was that my dormant instincts as a compliance auditor had already dismantled his trap, and I had quietly rewritten the ending. My name is Madison, and I am 34 years old. Today, I stood barefoot on the cold linoleum of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, watching the man I married march blindly into a slaughterhouse. If you have ever been underestimated by a narcissist who thought he could use your life as collateral, drop your age in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to Samantha Told Stories. You will want a front row seat to this downfall. The heavy rubber flaps of the scanner parted. My suitcase rolled out into the bright terminal light, gliding smoothly down the metal rollers. No red lights flashed. No officers reached for their radios. The bored transportation security agent simply took a sip of his water and waved me through. The color drained from Carter's face, leaving his skin a sickly translucent gray. His jaw slacked. His chest heaved in rapid, shallow bursts as his brain short-circuited, entirely unable to process how his foolproof snare had vanished into thin air. To understand how a wealthy vice president of procurement for a prominent Wisconsin heavy machinery firm found himself hyperventilating at a federal checkpoint, the timeline must rewind exactly 12 hours. The midnight air outside our Milwaukee suburb was biting, driving fresh snow against the frosted window panes of our master bedroom. We were scheduled to fly out the next morning for a corporate retreat in Cabo San Lucas. Carter insisted this luxury trip would mend our fraying marriage. I stood in the walk-in closet, finalizing my packing, organizing my resort wear with the clinical precision I once applied to my career. The house was dead quiet, save for the rhythmic, muffled sound of Carter sleeping soundly in the next room. I ran my hand along the internal perimeter of my roller bag, double-checking the zippers. My fingertips brushed against a dense, rigid lump protruding beneath the nylon lining. It felt like a block of concrete. Frowning, I unzipped the maintenance compartment and reached deep into the hidden cavity between the hard exterior shell and the fabric. My hand closed around a cold, unfamiliar leather pouch. Perching on the edge of a velvet ottoman, I pulled the hidden object into the dim light. The leather felt premium and suspiciously heavy. My pulse quickened as I unfastened the top clasp. Inside sat a thick stack of printed documents alongside a tightly compressed, vacuum-sealed brick of $100 bills. The air in the closet grew thin. I pulled the papers out, tilting them toward the glow of the hallway light. They were offshore wire transfer authorizations. Tracing the fine print, I spotted my own name listed as the primary account holder. At the bottom of each page rested a pristine forgery of my signature. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The physical weight of the cash anchored the horrifying reality of the situation. Carter was not engaging in a simple affair. He was actively orchestrating my demise. He intended to use me as an unwitting mule, sacrificing me at a foreign customs checkpoint to absorb the fallout of his embezzlement. He wanted me locked in a concrete cell, stripped of my rights and my freedom, while he played the tragic, betrayed husband back home. He wanted me to rot. I stared at the forged ink on the paper. and the dutiful, isolated housewife died in that closet. In her place, a cold, calculating auditor resurrected, ready to tear his life apart, piece by piece. A lesser woman would have marched down the hall, ripped the duvet off the sleeping traitor, and demanded answers. She would have screamed until the frosted window panes rattled in their frames. But rage is a sloppy, inefficient emotion, and I had spent a decade building a career out of clinical precision. I did not shed a single tear. I stared at the forged signature on the documents, allowing the raw betrayal to crystallize into sharp, icy focus. The obedient, docile housewife routine evaporated into the freezing Wisconsin night. I gathered the leather pouch, the stack of papers, and the compressed brick of currency, carrying them silently down the hallway to my home office. The hardwood floor chilled my bare feet, grounding my racing thoughts in reality. Setting the items onto my polished glass desk, I flicked on a small, warm lamp. I ran my fingertips along the rigid plastic encasing the $100 bills. This was not generic kitchen wrap. The material was a thick, unyielding polymer bordered by a distinct heat-crimped edge that required commercial machinery to seal. My thumb traced a faint, faded serial stamp on the corner of the plastic. My lungs tightened. I recognized that packaging. It was the exact proprietary barrier wrap used by the logistics department at Carter's heavy machinery plant, designed to protect sensitive hydraulic components from moisture during overseas shipping. He had not sourced this cash from a shadowy alleyway. He had stolen and packaged it directly on his own warehouse floor, bringing the physical evidence of his treason right into our sanctuary. Tucked beneath the money, sitting at the bottom of the pouch like a venomous insect, was a matte black flash drive. It bore the insignia of a military-grade hardware encryption firm. Staring at the small device, the psychological torment of the past year snapped into brutal context. A year ago, I was a senior compliance auditor for a multinational firm. I was sharp, relentless, and highly respected. Then I noticed minor discrepancies in our personal finances. When I asked Carter about them, he deployed a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He would look at me with deep, manufactured pity, placing his warm hands on my shoulders, whispering that the stress of my job was fracturing my reality. "You are just being paranoid, Madison," he would say, his voice dripping with practiced condescension. "You are losing your grip." He weaponized my demanding career against me. Every misplaced set of keys, every forgotten calendar event, he framed as undeniable evidence of my declining mental health. He isolated me from my colleagues, urging me to step away from the corporate world to focus on our marriage and a quiet life in our sprawling suburban home. I believed he was protecting me. I believed I was fragile. He wanted me blind, dependent, and stripped of my resources. He needed a naive scapegoat for his crimes, and he spent 12 months meticulously crafting me into one. He thought he had successfully broken my analytical mind. He severely underestimated the predator he had married. I reached under the desk and pulled out a sleek, heavily modified laptop I kept hidden in a locked drawer. I had not booted it up since my auditing days. The screen flared to life, casting a pale blue glow across my face in the darkened room. I plugged the black flash drive into the port. A prompt demanded a complex decryption key. Carter believed his expensive hardware would keep his secrets locked away forever, but men driven by ego always leave a back door. They rely on predictable patterns: birth dates, old street addresses, college fraternity numbers. Instead of guessing, I launched a proprietary bypass protocol I had engineered years ago to penetrate offshore tax havens. Lines of green code cascaded down the screen, silently dismantling his digital fortress. It took precisely 7 minutes for the barrier to collapse. The drive mounted to my desktop. I opened the primary folder titled simply Archive. Inside sat a collection of documents that made the blood freeze in my veins. I found dozens of drafted emails carefully manipulated to appear as though they had originated from my personal internet protocol address. The messages were directed to shady overseas shell companies negotiating the laundering of illicit funds. There were fabricated invoices all bearing my digital signature authorizing fraudulent payouts for heavy machinery parts that never existed. He had manufactured an alternate reality where I was the brilliant rogue architect of a $6 million supply chain embezzlement scheme. The narrative he planned to feed the authorities was devastatingly flawless. When the airport security dogs inevitably flagged my carry-on bag, the customs agents would tear it apart. They would find the illicit cash and this encrypted drive. Once federal cyber units cracked the hardware, they would discover the fabricated emails tying me to the stolen fortune. They would look at my background as a financial auditor and conclude I possessed the exact skill set necessary to execute the heist. I would be tried and convicted in a foreign jurisdiction known for draconian sentencing, while Carter played the grieving, betrayed husband back in Chicago. He would clear his name, keep the stolen fortune, and walk away untouched. The sheer malice required to orchestrate such a betrayal should have shattered me. Instead, it provided a thrilling, profound clarity. Carter brought a knife to a digital gunfight. He wanted a war of information, and I was going to give him one. I did not stop at simply reading his fabricated evidence. I needed the real truth. Leaving the flash drive plugged in, I accessed our home network router. Carter had changed his phone passcodes months ago, but he was too arrogant to secure the primary network handling traffic from his personal devices. I pulled the raw data logs from the past 30 days, scanning the digital footprints until I found a recurring, highly secured external portal. Using a backdoor search methodology I perfected during corporate audits, I breached his hidden digital vault. The dashboard loaded, revealing the true scope of his corporate treason. I exported the raw data into a sprawling spreadsheet, letting my fingers fly across the keyboard. I ran pivot tables, categorized expenditures, and traced routing numbers. I was back in my element, tearing apart financial filth with surgical precision. The data painted a masterpiece of fraud in high definition. Carter had created a labyrinth of phantom suppliers generating fake invoices for industrial steel that never shipped. He approved the funds as vice president of procurement, funneling the money out of Wisconsin and directly into a web of untraceable holding accounts. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the definitive proof of his guilt. The low hum of the laptop fan blended with the howling wind outside. I had enough ammunition to secure a highly favorable divorce and send him to a federal penitentiary for the next 2 decades. I could have stopped there, called the police and ended the nightmare. But as I traced the final destination of the offshore wire transfers, a stunning new variable emerged on my screen. The holding accounts were not registered under Carter's name, nor were they hidden behind anonymous corporate proxies. They were registered exclusively to one person, Paige, his 27-year-old executive assistant. My eyes scanned the back-end smart contracts governing the funds, and a chilling realization washed over me. Carter thought he was the mastermind, orchestrating a perfect escape, but he was blind to the trap closing around his own neck. Paige had instituted a hidden protocol, one that would change the entire trajectory of tomorrow morning's flight. And I was the only one who saw it coming. The decryption progress bar on the authentic master ledger reached 100% with a soft, satisfying chime. I dragged the files into my secure workspace, letting the software untangle the remaining administrative layers. As the raw financial routing data populated across my monitor, A glaring anomaly demanded my immediate attention. The destination, offshore holding entities initially disguised behind typical corporate jargon, possessed a secondary tier of ownership registration. Bypassing the superficial proxy addresses, I unearthed the ultimate beneficiary. The name glowing on the screen did not belong to a shadowy overseas broker. It belonged to Paige, my husband's 27-year-old executive assistant. I leaned closer to the monitor, letting the blue light reflect in my eyes. Paige was a woman who consistently wore an intoxicating, overpowering floral perfume and a wardrobe that far exceeded a standard administrative salary. During company holiday gatherings, she would greet me with an overly bright saccharine smile, offering backhanded compliments about my quiet domestic routine, while her gaze darted constantly toward Carter. She projected the perfect image of a devoted subordinate, eager to please the vice president of procurement. Yet, staring at the legal documentation establishing those Caribbean shell entities, I saw the undeniable truth. She was not merely his paramour. She was the sole legal proprietor of his embezzled empire. Why would a paranoid, controlling executive hand the keys to a vast fortune over to a junior employee? The answer lay buried in the back-end architecture of the wire transfers. I accessed the digital protocol governing the movement of the misappropriated funds. The architecture utilized a sophisticated smart contract, which is a self-executing piece of code designed to manage cryptocurrency conversions and banking routes autonomously. Carter likely believed he had established joint access utilizing cryptographic keys they both possessed. But my forensic background allowed me to read the underlying logic scripts beneath the sleek user interface. I traced the execution commands line by line. Hidden within the final phase of the routing sequence sat a secondary, dormant trigger. It was a unilateral lockout mechanism. The code was elegant, ruthless, and entirely invisible to anyone lacking advanced auditing experience. Paige had quietly installed a protocol scheduled to initiate the moment our flight touched down in Mexico. Upon execution, the smart contract would revoke Carter's access privileges, sever his digital keys, and funnel the entire $6 million into a tertiary, highly encrypted wallet accessible solely by her. The sheer audacity of the scheme left me breathless in the quiet solitude of my home office. Carter believed he was the brilliant mastermind, orchestrating the perfect crime by sacrificing his loyal wife to federal authorities so he could escape to a tropical paradise with his naive young lover. He thought he was playing a game of chess against a defenseless pawn. He had no inkling that the woman he was throwing his life away for was actively rigging the board to obliterate him. Paige was stealing his pilfered fortune. The poetic irony hanging in the frigid Wisconsin air felt suffocating. The man sleeping down the hall had spent an entire year subjecting me to rigorous psychological abuse, systematically attempting to convince me my mind was failing. He isolated me, mocked my intuition, and plotted to send me to a foreign prison, all for the promise of a glamorous new life. Instead, he was blindly walking toward his own financial and personal slaughter. A soft, chilling laugh escaped my lips, echoing faintly against the frosted glass of the window. The betrayal no longer stung. The heartbreak had officially transmuted into a weaponized glacial resolve. I did not just possess the exonerating proof required to clear my name at an international customs checkpoint. I held the digital guillotine for both of them. I reached for my encrypted external hard drive, connecting it to the laptop. I initiated a secure transfer, dragging every piece of damning documentation into my untraceable cloud server. I compiled the forged offshore wire transfers, the fabricated emails designed to frame me, and the authentic master ledger proving Carter's extensive supply chain fraud. I included the smart contract scripts exposing Page's impending double-cross. This ghost server resided in jurisdictions that ignore subpoenas, operating as a digital fortress I constructed years ago for safeguarding whistleblower records. Now it served as the staging ground for a spectacular corporate execution. With the dossier compiled, I composed a series of automated messages. I targeted the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Regional Field Office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Chicago, and the personal email addresses of every sitting board member at Carter's heavy machinery firm. I attached the unredacted files, providing a meticulous, undeniable roadmap of the $6 million heist. I set the delivery timer for exactly 6 in the morning. By the time Carter and I entered the private vehicle to begin our commute to O'Hare, the digital detonation would already be silently echoing through federal inboxes. His career, his reputation, and his freedom would burn to ash before we even crossed the state line. The progress bar hit completion. I safely ejected the drive and powered down the workstation. The digital trap was securely set, primed to obliterate the predators who thought they had cornered me. Yet a severe, immediate danger still lingered just down the hallway. I stood up, feeling the hardwood floor creak slightly beneath my weight. Securing the electronic proof meant nothing if I failed to survive the physical snare waiting in our master bedroom. Carter had planted a vacuum-sealed brick of illicit cash and a leather pouch of forged documents deep inside my carry-on luggage. When the sun rose, he would insist on handling my bags, maintaining his facade of chivalry to ensure his contraband remained securely hidden until we reached the airport scanners. I could not simply extract the pouch and leave the lining empty. Carter would notice the sudden weight discrepancy the second he lifted the roller bag. He was a man obsessed with details, hyper-vigilant about the execution of his plans. A missing 3-pound block would instantly shatter the illusion of my ignorance, triggering a volatile confrontation in our isolated home long before the authorities received my emails. He would realize his plan was compromised, giving him ample time to destroy the physical items, flee the jurisdiction, or try something far worse. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I needed a substitute. I needed an object of identical density, weight, and metallic composition to trick his hands and fool an X-ray machine just long enough to get him into the security queue. The digital war was won, but the physical battlefield required immediate navigation. I slipped out of the home office, creeping back into the darkened hallway. The rhythmic sound of Carter's breathing drifted from the bedroom, acting as a chilling reminder of the sociopath sharing my home. I bypassed our door, moving silently toward the kitchen. I had to find a decoy, a precise counterweight to swap into the luggage before he woke up, and I had exactly 4 hours left to orchestrate the most dangerous sleight of hand of my life. The digital war was won, but the physical battlefield required immediate navigation. I stood in the dim glow of my home office, staring down the dark hallway that led back to the master bedroom. Securing the electronic proof on a ghost server meant nothing if I failed to survive the physical snare waiting in my luggage. Carter had planted a vacuum-sealed brick of illicit cash and a leather pouch of forged documents deep inside the lining of my navy blue carry-on bag. When the sun rose, he would insist on handling my luggage. He would maintain his facade of chivalry to ensure his contraband remained securely hidden until we reached the airport scanners. I could not simply extract the pouch and leave the lining empty. Carter would notice the sudden weight discrepancy the second he lifted the roller bag by its telescopic handle. He was a man obsessed with minutiae, a procurement executive trained to notice when supply chain metrics felt off by a fraction of an ounce. A missing 3-pound block would instantly shatter the illusion of my ignorance. It would trigger a volatile confrontation in our isolated home long before the federal authorities received my automated emails. He would realize his plan was compromised, giving him ample time to destroy the physical evidence, drain his accounts, and flee the jurisdiction. I needed a substitute. I needed an object of identical density, weight, and metallic composition to trick his hands and fool an X-ray machine just long enough to get him into the security queue. My bare feet traced a silent path across the chilled hardwood floors, bypassing our bedroom and heading toward the sprawling kitchen. The granite countertops felt like ice under my fingertips. In the corner of the dining room sat the staging area for our checked luggage. Carter always insisted on bringing lavish, localized gifts for his international developers. This specific client in Cabo San Lucas was an aficionado of artisanal dairy. To appease him, Carter had ordered a bespoke Wisconsin cheese slicer. This was no flimsy kitchen gadget. Crafted by a boutique metalworker in Milwaukee, the piece was a solid rectangular block of brushed stainless steel. It was a heavy industrial-grade tool meant to honor the manufacturing heritage of the state while serving a culinary purpose. I had packed it securely in a padded cardboard box inside my large checked suitcase earlier that afternoon. I knelt beside the large checked bag, carefully easing the zipper open to avoid making any sharp metallic sounds. I dug through layers of resort wear and evening dresses until my fingers grazed the cardboard box. Pulling it out into the pale moonlight spilling through the kitchen window, I discarded the packaging and held the raw steel block in my hands. The heft was remarkable. It weighed exactly 3 pounds. My mind, highly trained to analyze variables and predict structural outcomes, quickly calculated the physics of an airport security scanner. Security X-ray machines measure material density to assign color profiles on the monitors. Organic items, like clothing, plastics, and currency, show up in bright orange or green hues. Dense metals absorb the radiation entirely, presenting as stark, impenetrable dark voids on the screens. If Carter stared at the security monitor tomorrow morning, he would not see stacks of $100 bills. He would see a dark, heavy, rectangular anomaly buried in the lining of my bag. He would assume his illicit cargo was perfectly intact, right up until the moment the suitcase exited the machine without sounding a single alarm. The steel block was the ultimate decoy. Holding the cold metal against my chest, I carried the substitute down the hallway. The floorboards near the master bathroom creaked slightly under my added weight. That tiny wooden groan sent a sharp spike of adrenaline straight into my veins. I froze in the shadows, holding my breath, listening intently to the bedroom ahead. The rhythmic sound of Carter breathing hitched, paused, and then resumed its steady, deep cadence. He was a light sleeper when burdened by his own schemes, usually requiring 2 glasses of expensive scotch to knock himself out. One wrong step, one loud noise, and he would open his eyes to find me standing over our luggage with a block of steel in the dead of night. My entire digital trap would dissolve if I failed this physical execution. Stepping back into the dim gloom of the bedroom, I crouched beside my navy blue roller bag. The zipper of the maintenance lining felt freezing against my fingertips. I gripped the small metal pull tab and eased it open inch by inch, timing the metallic slide with the howling gusts of winter wind battering the frosted window panes outside. When the cavity was wide enough, I reached inside and retrieved the leather pouch containing the forged wire transfers and the stolen cash. The burden of his betrayal felt heavy in my palms, a tangible reminder of the future he tried to steal from me. I set the pouch gently on the carpet and picked up the stainless steel slicer. I slid the heavy metal block into the exact hollow space where the cash had been resting. I pressed the corners deep into the structural frame of the luggage, ensuring it did not bulge or stretch the nylon fabric in an unnatural way. I smoothed the internal lining over the metal, hiding it entirely from sight. Pulling the zipper shut, I grabbed the handle of the suitcase and lifted it a few inches off the floor. The balance was flawless. The weight was identical. When Carter carried this bag down the stairs in a few hours, his hands would sense no difference. He would believe his snare was still perfectly primed. Now I needed to secure the real evidence. I turned my attention to the plush reading chair in the corner of the room. Resting on the velvet cushion was my oversized leather tote bag. This was my designated personal item for the flight, a piece of luggage that would remain firmly planted on my shoulder or tucked securely beneath the airplane seat in front of me. I opened the wide top compartment and pushed aside my cashmere travel wrap, my laptop sleeve, and a small cosmetic case. I took the leather pouch of contraband and buried it at the very bottom of the tote. I arranged the scarf and the electronics over it, creating a perfect visual shield. Tomorrow, the very evidence required to send my husband to a federal penitentiary would literally hang from my arm. The physical logistics were complete. I stood in the dark, my feet numb from the cold floor, and looked down at the man occupying my bed. I pulled back the heavy duvet and slipped beneath the sheets. The contrast in temperature was jarring. Carter's body heat radiated across the mattress, a suffocating warmth that made my skin crawl. For a year, I had laid next to this man, internalizing his psychological manipulation. I had allowed his cruel gaslighting to convince me I was losing my mind, slowly fading into the background while he built an empire of lies. He thought his wealth and his corporate title made him untouchable. He believed my isolation made me weak. He failed to comprehend that isolating an auditor only gives her uninterrupted time to review the ledger. As I stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint shadows cast by the moonlight, a profound sense of tranquility washed over me. The tears I should have cried for my broken marriage were entirely absent. They had been replaced by an icy, calculated focus. The trap was set. The decoy was planted. The digital execution order was counting down to 6 a.m. My heart pounded a steady, cold rhythm against my ribs. I regulated my breathing, forcing my chest to rise and fall in a slow, hypnotic pattern. I needed to rest. When the sun rose over the frozen Wisconsin landscape, the hardest performance of my life would officially begin. I would have to wake up, smile, and pour coffee for a man who signed my death warrant. I would have to play the role of the oblivious, grateful wife, acting thrilled about a luxury vacation meant to save our union. But the true test of my endurance would not just be Carter. Paige would be waiting for us. The mistress, the thief, the accomplice. We were scheduled to share a private vehicle to the airport. I would be trapped in a confined space for over an hour, sitting inches away from the two predators actively plotting my demise, all while harboring the heavy leather pouch that would soon seal their fate. The executioner would smile in the morning, but surviving the suffocating tension of that icy commute promised to be the ultimate test of my restraint. Dawn broke over Wisconsin with a ferocious, howling gale. Blinding white powder battered the frosted windows, threatening to bury the Milwaukee suburbs under a thick sheet of ice. I stood by the vanity mirror, applying a neutral shade of lipstick, forcing my facial muscles into a relaxed, eager configuration. Carter emerged from the bathroom, radiating an unnatural, manufactured energy. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, looking every inch the elite procurement executive preparing for a lavish retreat. He approached from behind, wrapping his arms around my waist and pressing a practiced hollow kiss to my temple. "Ready for our getaway, darling?" he murmured, his tone dripping with fabricated devotion. "Just you, me, and the ocean." I smiled at my reflection, suppressing the visceral urge to recoil from his touch. "I cannot wait," I replied smoothly. He moved toward the bedroom door, reaching for the telescopic handle of my navy blue roller bag. I held my breath, watching him through the mirror. As he hoisted the luggage, his forearm muscles flexed. I saw a distinct flicker of dark satisfaction flash across his features. The hefty, solid steel cheese slicer resting in the lining mirrored the exact density of his contraband. His brain registered the familiar heft, confirming his lethal snare was intact. He offered a charming grin, entirely oblivious that he was carrying a culinary decoy. "Let me get this downstairs for you," he insisted, playing the chivalrous gentleman. I grabbed my oversized leather tote, the true vessel holding his imminent destruction, and slung it over my shoulder. The biting cold slapped my cheeks the moment we stepped onto the front porch. A sleek black private SUV idled in the driveway, its exhaust plumes billowing into the freezing air. The chauffeur opened the rear door. As I slid onto the heated leather seat, a suffocating wave of heavy floral perfume assaulted my senses. Sitting in the front passenger seat, twisting around to greet us, was Paige. She wore a pristine, wildly extravagant cashmere coat with a genuine mink collar. It was a garment no junior executive assistant could legitimately afford on her declared salary. The coat screamed of laundered corporate funds and hidden offshore bank accounts. Her blonde hair fell in perfect cascading waves, and her lips curled into a predatory saccharine smile. "Good morning, Madison," she chimed, her voice pitched half an octave higher than necessary. "Carter mentioned we might share the ride since I have to drop off some urgent procurement files at the Chicago office before your flight. I hope you do not mind the intrusion." The sheer audacity of the arrangement was breathtaking. My husband was taking me on a luxury trip meant to salvage our vows, and he brought his mistress along for the commute. I arranged my features into a picture of polite, clueless hospitality. "Not at all, Paige," I answered, keeping my tone light and breezy. "It makes perfect sense to carpool in this terrible weather." Carter settled in next to me, closing the heavy door, sealing us inside the confined space. The vehicle shifted into gear, carving a path through the snowdrifts toward the interstate. The hour-long journey morphed into a suffocating masterclass in psychological warfare. Paige dominated the conversation, steering every topic toward high-stakes corporate negotiations and international supply chain logistics. She wielded industry jargon like a weapon, actively trying to exclude me from the dialogue. Every few minutes, she threw a thinly veiled, condescending remark over her shoulder. "It must be so relaxing," Paige mused, adjusting her expensive mink collar. "Staying home every day, baking, organizing the pantry. I honestly do not know how you fill the hours without going stir-crazy. The corporate grind is just so relentless. But I guess some women are just built for a slower, quieter existence." A year ago, that blatant insult would have provoked a sharp, surgical, verbal dismantling. The old auditor in me would have stripped away her arrogance in 3 sentences. But the woman holding the leather tote bag understood the value of playing the fool. "It certainly has its charms," I replied, offering a placid, vacant nod. "Carter takes such good care of us. I never have to worry about the complex things." In the rearview mirror, I caught Paige locking eyes with Carter. A smug, shared smirk passed between them. They were reveling in their superiority, high on the thrill of riding in the same car as the oblivious disposable wife. They believed they were the wolves. While Paige basked in her stolen luxury, Carter began to exhibit signs of severe internal strain. His knee bounced in a rapid, rhythmic tremor against the center console. His gaze kept dropping to the oversized leather tote bag resting in my lap. The contraband was buried deep at the bottom, shielded by my laptop and cashmere travel wrap, but its proximity to his betraying hands drove his anxiety through the roof. He was a control freak by nature, a man accustomed to managing every variable in his warehouse, and right now, the most dangerous variable was sitting unzipped on my lap. He cleared his throat, his eyes darting toward the leather handles. "Darling," he began, his voice tight. "Did you remember your passport? You usually keep it in the front pocket of your roller bag, but I did not see it." He was fishing. He wanted me to open the tote, terrified I had forgotten my travel documents, or worse, that I might rummage through the depths of the bag to find a phone charger and stumble upon the leather pouch. I patted the side of the tote, smiling reassuringly. "It is safely tucked in the side pocket right here," I said, making no move to unzip the main compartment. "Do you want to double-check it?" Carter swallowed hard, a bead of perspiration forming at his temple despite the climate-controlled chill of the SUV. No, he stammered quickly, looking away toward the frosted window. "Just making sure we are prepared. The TSA lines at O'Hare are going to be a nightmare today." I rested my hands atop the smooth leather, feeling the solid, dense lump resting at the base. My pulse remained steady, rhythmic, and perfectly regulated. The digital clock on the dashboard glowed bright green, displaying 7:15 in the morning. I stared at those glowing numbers, a profound, icy satisfaction blooming in my chest. The automated servers in my home office had executed their programming exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes ago. While Paige mocked my domestic lifestyle, and Carter sweated over my carry-on an encrypted data packet containing unredacted master ledgers, forged wire transfers, and damning smart contracts, was actively detonating inside the inboxes of federal investigators and board directors. The Securities and Exchange Commission was reading their names. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was likely assigning a task force to Carter's manufacturing plant at this very moment. The executives who trusted him were realizing he had bled their company dry. The two arrogant predators sitting in this vehicle were already ruined. Their careers were over, their illicit assets were frozen, and their freedom was ticking away by the second. They were dead, but they just had not stopped breathing yet. The sprawling, chaotic infrastructure of Chicago O'Hare International Airport loomed on the horizon, breaking through the gray winter haze. The towering glass facades of the terminals signaled the end of the commute and the beginning of the physical execution. Carter shifted in his seat, leaning forward to instruct the driver to head toward the premium departure lanes. The vehicle descended into the concrete labyrinth of the drop-off zone. We were minutes away from the VIP lounge. Soon, I would have to navigate a crowded room, heavily monitored by security cameras, manufacture a flawless distraction, and swap the damning evidence into Paige's luggage without raising a single suspicion. The insulated safety of the SUV was ending, and the highest-stakes maneuver of my life was about to begin. The tires of the private vehicle crunched against the slush-covered curb of Terminal 5. The chauffeur hauled our luggage onto a brass trolley, and we merged into the sprawling ecosystem of Chicago O'Hare. The ambient roar of rolling suitcases overlapping public address announcements and frantic travelers washed over me. Carter bypassed the snaking general security queues, his hand gripping the small of my back with rigid, possessive tension. He steered us toward a frosted glass entrance marked for premium passengers, an exclusive enclave reserved for high-tier executives and international first-class ticket holders. Early in his career, my husband had clawed his way up the corporate ladder specifically to gain access to these hidden sanctuaries. He firmly believed that a titanium membership card shielded him from the rules governing ordinary citizens. His entire embezzlement scheme relied on this deep-seated arrogance. Yet, as we crossed the threshold, his polished exterior began to fracture. The sliding doors hissed open, muting the chaotic terminal noise and replacing it with soft jazz and the faint clinking of crystal glassware. The lounge projected an aura of hushed privilege. Waitstaff in crisp uniforms circulated with silver trays, while business tycoons tapped quietly on laptops beneath warm, amber lighting. Carter selected a secluded cluster of leather armchairs in the far corner. The seating arrangement was a calculated choice. A towering wall of floor-to-ceiling glass ran parallel to our table, offering an unobstructed panoramic view of the priority TSA screening lanes located just one floor down. He wanted a front-row seat to the impending spectacle. He wanted to watch federal agents descend on me from the comfort of a velvet chair, sipping espresso, while his devoted wife was dragged away in handcuffs. However, the imminent reality of his plot was tearing his nervous system apart. A fine sheen of moisture gathered along his hairline. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, then buttoned it again, his fingers trembling in a rapid, uncontrollable rhythm. The confident, predatory smirk from the car ride had vanished, replaced by the shallow breathing of a man who realized he was standing on the precipice of a sheer drop. He checked his platinum watch 3 times in the span of 60 seconds. The pressure of orchestrating a federal crime was actively short-circuiting his brain. Paige dropped into the armchair beside me, letting out an exaggerated, theatrical sigh that pierced the quiet atmosphere. She adjusted the collar of her mink coat, her painted lips twisting in profound annoyance. "The climate control in these airports is ruinous," she complained, pulling a silver compact mirror from her pocket to inspect her pristine complexion. "My skin is practically flaking. I need to fix my makeup before we board." She stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her tailored trousers. With astonishing carelessness, she unshouldered her travel bag and let it fall onto the plush carpet right next to my chair. It was a custom monogrammed calfskin duffel, an opulent piece of luggage far beyond the means of an administrative assistant. The golden hardware gleamed under the overhead lights. She abandoned the bag without a second thought, treating me as a harmless, invisible piece of furniture, incapable of original thought. Her entitlement was staggering. She pivoted on her heel and strutted down the hallway toward the marble-lined restrooms, leaving her most valuable possessions sitting inches from my boots. Carter watched her leave, his jaw muscles clenching so tight I could hear his teeth grind. Suddenly, his phone vibrated against the glass tabletop, emitting a harsh buzzing tone. He snatched the device, staring at the blank screen with manufactured urgency. "It is the European Supply Chain Director," he announced, his voice tight and overly loud, performing for an audience of one. "They must have caught an error in the quarterly projections. I have to take this before we clear customs. Order a tea, Madison. I will be right back." He pointed toward a row of soundproof glass phone booths lining the opposite wall. Without waiting for my response, he marched away, his polished shoes sinking into the thick carpet. He stepped inside the narrow cubicle, slid the heavy door shut, and turned his back to the lounge. He pressed the phone to his ear, gesturing wildly with his free hand, acting out a frantic corporate crisis to an empty line. He believed he had orchestrated the perfect final pause, isolating me before leading me to the slaughter. The lock engaged. The countdown initiated. I was sitting alone in a quiet corner of the departure lounge. Resting on my lap was the oversized leather tote containing the heavy, sealed brick of stolen currency and the forged offshore ledgers. Resting mere inches from my right boot was Paige's unlocked calfskin duffel. The spatial dynamic was flawless. I reached down, my fingers grazing the cold metal zipper of the tote, preparing to execute the transfer. I had exactly 3 minutes before Carter finished his theatrical performance or Paige returned from the vanity mirror. Then my peripheral vision caught a subtle movement. A dark, spherical dome, mounted on the ceiling directly above our seating area, rotated with a faint mechanical whir. My blood ran cold. The lens adjusted, fixing its focus on my section of the room. As a former compliance auditor, I had spent hundreds of hours reviewing high-definition surveillance footage to track warehouse inventory shrinkage. I knew exactly how pan-tilt-zoom monitoring devices operated. I slowly scanned the perimeter of the ceiling without moving my head. 3 more security cameras hung from the elegant light fixtures, their overlapping fields of view blanketing every inch of the high-end sanctuary. This was not a chaotic public terminal where a quick sleight of hand could go unnoticed. The lounge was designed to protect wealthy patrons, making it an impenetrable fortress of surveillance. Furthermore, a uniformed waiter stood stationed near the buffet, his eyes scanning the tables for empty glasses and uncollected napkins. If I reached into my tote, pulled out a thick pouch and shoved it into the unattended bag of another passenger, the cameras would record the entire sequence in vivid detail. The waitstaff would intervene immediately. Airport security would be alerted before Carter even opened the door to the phone booth. My 3-minute window was evaporating, and the environment was a trap closing in around me. I sat frozen, the leather handles of my tote digging into my palms. I needed the cameras blinded, or at least occupied by a larger threat. I needed the attentive staff looking anywhere else but at my hands. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a young waiter emerging from the kitchen doors. He was balancing a heavy silver tray laden with steaming ceramic pots of black coffee and stacks of porcelain cups, walking directly toward the narrow aisle bordering my chair. The gears in my mind locked into place, analyzing the trajectory, the heat of the liquid, and the fragile nature of the ceramics. I could not hide in the shadows, so I had to manufacture a blinding spotlight. The young attendant moved with practiced grace, balancing a gleaming silver platter on his left palm. Steam curled from the spouts of 3 pristine ceramic pots. I watched his reflection in the polished glass of the terminal window, calculating his exact path. During my tenure as a compliance investigator, I frequently conducted unannounced physical inventory audits at manufacturing facilities. I learned early on that human beings are remarkably predictable creatures. When sudden chaos erupts, people do not look at the shadows. They stare directly at the disaster. I needed a disaster. I needed every eye in this exclusive enclave, including the pan-tilt zoom lenses overhead, focused on the floor rather than my hands. As the waiter stepped within 18 inches of my armchair, I shifted my weight forward. I extended my right elbow, feigning a clumsy attempt to reach for a cocktail napkin resting on the edge of the table. My forearm collided firmly with the bottom rim of the silver tray. The impact was precise, designed to disrupt his center of gravity without appearing intentional. The resulting destruction was spectacular. The tray tipped downward. A chorus of sharp gasps echoed through the hushed lounge as the ceramic pots tumbled into the air. They shattered against the edge of the marble baseboards, sending a scalding wave of dark liquid cascading across the thick carpet. Shards of pristine porcelain scattered across the floor like shrapnel. Steaming black coffee splashed onto the cuffs of my trousers and pooled around the legs of the leather chairs. The rich, bitter aroma of roasted beans instantly masked the sterile scent of the airport. "Oh my goodness," I gasped, injecting a perfect pitch of mortified panic into my voice. "I am so incredibly sorry. I did not see you there." The waiter flushed and, scrambling immediately, began apologizing. He was trained to take the blame for any mishap involving a premium guest. Within seconds, a synchronized ballet of customer service initiated. 2 nearby attendants rushed over holding stacks of thick white towels, while a lounge manager stepped directly between my seating area and the ceiling surveillance cameras to assess the damage. Their hurried movements formed a flawless human shield. 3 adults were now crouched or bending over the sprawling puddle, their bodies effectively obscuring the sight line from the overhead lenses. The attention of the entire room was anchored to the hissing liquid and the broken ceramics. This was my window. It would remain open for perhaps 40 seconds before the mess was cleared and the visual perimeter was reestablished. I dropped to my knees, grabbing a handful of napkins from the table, pretending to assist with the cleanup. My heart beat in a cold, measured cadence. I kept my head down, letting my hair fall forward to obscure my face. While my right hand dabbed aimlessly at a coffee stain on the carpet, my left hand reached toward the oversized leather tote resting against the leg of my chair. I slid my fingers past my laptop sleeve and the cashmere travel wrap, plunging into the dark depths of the bag. My knuckles brushed against the cold, familiar texture of the contraband pouch. I gripped the heavy package. It held the forged offshore wire transfers, the illicit currency, and the digital ledger that would ruin my life if found in my possession. Pulling it free from my tote, I kept the pouch pinned tight against my thigh, hidden beneath the drape of my long winter coat. I pivoted slightly on my knees, shifting my body weight toward the abandoned calfskin duffel sitting just inches away. Paige had left the main zipper slightly open, a testament to her profound carelessness. I slipped my hand into her luxurious luggage. The interior smelled of overpowering floral perfume and expensive mints. My fingertips navigated through tangled silk blouses and a velvet cosmetic case searching for a suitable void. I found the structured lining at the base of the bag, a rigid compartment designed to hold heavy shoes. I shoved the dense pouch deep into that cavity, pressing it flat against the reinforced bottom. I maneuvered the corners of the hidden package, ensuring it nested flush against the leather seams. I arranged her silk garments over the top, burying the federal crimes beneath her stolen luxury. I grabbed the golden zipper pull of her duffel and pulled it shut. The metallic teeth locked together with a soft, final hiss. The physical transfer was complete. The margin for error remained razor-thin. The sound of sharp, distinct footsteps echoed down the marble corridor leading from the luxury restrooms. The rhythmic striking of designer heels signaled Paige's return. Her strut was unmistakable. She was seconds away from turning the corner and witnessing me kneeling next to her possessions. I snapped my hand away from her bag, shifting my focus entirely back to the spilled coffee. I scrubbed vigorously at the carpet with my damp napkins. The lounge manager touched my shoulder, offering a warm, professional smile. "Please do not worry about this, ma'am," he urged softly. "We will take care of the mess. Just be careful not to burn yourself." I offered him a flustered, grateful nod, playing the part of the embarrassed traveler. "Thank you," I murmured, standing up and brushing the invisible dust from my knees. "I am just so clumsy today." I slid back into my armchair just as Paige rounded the corner. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her lips reapplied in a vibrant blood-red shade. She froze, staring at the 3 staff members scrubbing the carpet around our table, her nose wrinkled in blatant disgust. "What on earth happened here?" she demanded, her voice dripping with entitled irritation. She stepped carefully around a damp patch of carpet, lifting the hem of her trousers to avoid the dark stains. I spilled my drink. I admitted, keeping my tone submissive and meek. "I am just a bit scattered this morning." Paige rolled her eyes, letting out a sharp scoff. "Try to be a little more mindful, Madison. This is an exclusive area, not a roadside diner." She reached down and grabbed the handles of her calfskin duffel, lifting it off the floor. I held my breath, watching the muscles in her slender arm flex. The bag was now 3 pounds heavier. Would she notice the difference? Would her pampered instincts detect the sudden, dense weight anchoring the bottom of her luggage? The leather straps pulled taut. She hoisted the bag onto her shoulder with a frustrated huff, adjusting her mink coat, entirely oblivious to the fact that she was now carrying her own destruction. She did not feel the weight of the crimes. She only felt the inconvenience of the moment. At that exact second, the heavy glass door of the soundproof phone booth slid open. Carter stepped out, sliding his smartphone into the inner pocket of his tailored suit. His forehead still glistened with a fine layer of nervous perspiration, but he forced a wide, triumphant grin onto his face. The fake corporate crisis was apparently resolved. He clapped his hands together, the sound cutting sharply through the quiet ambiance of the lounge. "Crisis averted," he announced, his voice tight and strained. "The European team fixed the projection error. We are clear to head to the gate." He looked directly at me, his eyes dropping to the floor to inspect the frantic cleanup efforts, then shifting quickly to my navy blue roller bag sitting safely by the wall. He believed his trap was still perfectly primed inside that luggage. "Time to go, darling," he instructed, his tone echoing a chilling finality. "Let us get through security so we can relax." He reached for the handle of my roller bag. The metal cheese slicer hidden in the lining gave the luggage the exact heft he expected. He nodded, satisfied, and pointed us toward the exit. The payload had been successfully transferred, but the true test of my endurance was just beginning. We now had to march together toward the federal checkpoint. Every step we took brought us closer to the scanning machines, where Carter expected to witness my public ruin, and where Paige would unknowingly submit her stolen empire to the scrutinizing gaze of Homeland Security. Surviving the walk without betraying a single shred of anticipation would require every ounce of discipline I possessed. The transition from the hushed tranquility of the VIP departure lounge back into the echoing expanse of Terminal 5 felt like stepping onto a battlefield. The frosted glass doors hissed shut behind us, cutting off the soft jazz and replacing it with the relentless overlapping clamor of thousands of travelers. Overhead speakers blared final boarding calls for international flights, while the squeak of rubber soles on polished terrazzo created a chaotic symphony. Carter did not pause to adjust to the sensory shift. He gripped the telescopic handle of my navy blue roller bag with white-knuckled intensity, his long legs instantly eating up the floor. He was setting a punishing pace, weaving through throngs of weary passengers with ruthless efficiency. His tailored charcoal suit, usually worn with effortless corporate grace, now seemed to constrict him. Every movement he made telegraphed a toxic, barely contained anticipation. Early in our marriage, I mistook this manic assertiveness for leadership. Carter possessed an insatiable hunger for control, a trait that served him well managing complex global supply chains. He thrived on dictating the flow of materials, people, and capital, manipulating variables until they yielded to his desired outcome. Back then, letting him steer the course of our lives felt protective. I allowed his dominating presence to build a fortress around me, insulating me from the exhausting demands of my own financial career. Now, observing his rigid posture from a few paces behind that fortress revealed itself as a carefully constructed cage. He was marching me toward what he firmly believed would be my ultimate destruction, eager to watch the steel jaws of his trap snap shut. He wanted me out of the picture, permanently, and he lacked the courage to simply ask for a divorce. He preferred annihilation. Trailing a few steps to my left, Paige struggled to maintain the demanding tempo. Her designer heels clicked erratically against the hard floor, a chaotic counterpoint to the steady, rhythmic hum of her calfskin duffel bag rolling beside her. That smooth, vibrating sound grated on her nerves, but to me, it sounded like a ticking clock. The young executive assistant huffed, shifting the heavy mink coat on her shoulders, deeply annoyed by the sudden rush. "Carter, slow down!" she complained, her voice pitched in a petulant whine. "My flight does not board for another hour. There is no need to sprint through the concourse like we are flying economy." Carter ignored her plea entirely. He did not turn around, nor did he offer his usual placating smile. His focus remained laser-locked on the priority TSA lane looming at the end of the concourse. He needed to keep his eyes securely on my luggage. The sheer volume of dramatic irony unfolding in this narrow corridor was staggering. Paige strutted along, irritated by the pace, but otherwise profoundly comfortable in her stolen luxury. She carried a hidden cargo that demanded decades of mandatory federal sentencing. She was rolling her own indictment across the terminal, thoroughly oblivious to the forged documents and pilfered currency nestled beneath her silk blouses. She thought she was the victor, the beautiful younger woman claiming the wealthy executive. She had no idea she was nothing more than a beast of burden. I matched my husband's frantic strides, but my internal physiology told a vastly different story. My heart rate remained steady. My breathing flowed in deep, measured cycles. Years spent conducting high-stakes corporate interrogations taught me how to weaponize my own composure. An auditor learns to strip away emotion, treating panic as a useless, blinding variable. You observe the subject. You monitor their baseline behaviors and document their deviations. Carter was deviating wildly from his baseline. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles twitched. A solitary drop of sweat traced a path down his temple. While he allowed his adrenaline to spike into dangerous territory, I maintained a glacial calm. I was a spectator, watching a tragedy unfold in real time, observing the microscopic fractures in his arrogant facade. The priority security checkpoint materialized ahead, cordoned off by thick velvet ropes and manned by stern-faced federal agents. The air here carried a distinct, sterile scent of ozone floor wax and the nervous perspiration of rushing passengers. Beyond the podiums, a row of sprawling gray conveyor belts fed into the dark, gaping maws of the X-ray scanners. This was the threshold. This was the jurisdiction where corporate titles, expensive tailoring, and platinum membership cards meant nothing. Once a piece of luggage crossed onto those stainless steel rollers, it belonged to Homeland Security. There was no charming your way out of a federal screening. We bypassed the winding general admission lines, entering the expedited queue. Carter practically shoved his boarding pass and identification at the agent working the podium. He bounced on the balls of his feet, his fingers drumming a frantic rhythm against the edge of the desk. I handed my documents over with a polite, effortless smile, offering a pleasant morning greeting. The agent nodded, verified my credentials, and waved us into the screening area. The ambient noise morphed into a mechanical symphony of rattling plastic bins, sharp commands from uniformed personnel, and the low drone of the imaging machines. Carter bypassed an empty available lane. Instead, he steered us toward a specific conveyor belt on the far right. He wanted a lane that offered a clear, unobstructed sightline to the agent's illuminated monitor. He desired front-row seats to my downfall. His hands shook with suppressed excitement as he reached the metal staging table. He grabbed 3 gray plastic bins from the stack, dropping them onto the rollers with sharp, forceful clatters. The sound echoed harshly over the low hum of the conveyor belt. Paige finally caught up, breathless and visibly irritated. She reached for a bin, but Carter swiftly maneuvered his body, inserting himself between her and the conveyor belt. He used his broad shoulders to physically block her path, ensuring she could not load her calfskin duffel before I processed my items. He needed my bag to enter the tunnel first. He needed the explosion to center solely on me, leaving him and his mistress safely outside the blast radius. He threw his own suit jacket and briefcase onto the belt, haphazardly clearing the deck for the main event. "You go first, honey," he urged, his voice trembling with a toxic blend of fear and impending victory. He gestured toward the empty plastic bins. "Put your things on the belt. Let us get you through quickly so we can relax on the other side." His eyes were wide, dilated with manic anticipation. He stepped back just enough to give me access to the staging area, his gaze fixed hungrily on the navy blue roller bag. He was waiting for the siren. He was waiting for the heavy hands of federal law enforcement to pull me down to the cold floor. I slipped my winter coat off my shoulders, folding it neatly into the first bin. I placed my oversized leather tote into the second, removing my laptop and placing it in a separate tray to comply with federal screening regulations. Then I turned to the roller bag. Carter hovered mere inches from my elbow, his breathing shallow and erratic. I gripped the telescopic handle. The dense 3-pound steel cheese slicer hidden inside the lining provided the exact heft he had felt earlier. I lifted the luggage. I turned my head, meeting his frantic, expectant stare. I offered him a sweet, perfectly oblivious smile. I placed the bag squarely onto the rubber belt. The heavy fabric settled against the tracks with a dull thud. The executioner had laid his trap, and I was willingly stepping into it. Now, all that remained was for the machine to reveal the truth hidden beneath the nylon. The heavy rubber flaps of the federal screening machine swallowed my navy blue roller bag. I stood at the edge of the stainless steel staging table, maintaining a relaxed posture while keeping my eyes fixed on the nearby observation monitor. The glowing screen painted the internal contents of my luggage in a vivid, shifting landscape of neon hues. Folded silk blouses and thick woolen sweaters registered in bright organic oranges. Cosmetic bottles and plastic toiletry bags illuminated the display in fluorescent greens. Resting precisely in the center of the cross-section was a stark, impenetrable rectangular anomaly. The Wisconsin cheese slicer absorbed the radiation, presenting as a dense, dark void against the colorful backdrop. To an untrained eye, that solid black block looked ominous. Carter certainly thought so. He leaned precariously far over the metal rollers, holding his breath. His knuckles turned bone white as he gripped the edge of the staging area. His eyes were wide and hungry, tracking the scrolling image with a predatory intensity. He was a man who spent his entire career projecting quarterly yields and calculating global freight logistics. His reality was built on predictable metrics and guaranteed outcomes. In his mind, he had solved the ultimate equation to rid himself of his wife while maintaining his pristine corporate reputation. He anticipated the transportation security agent would spot the dense package, recognize the signature profile of smuggled contraband, and halt the conveyor belt. He waited for the harsh blare of alarms and the swift arrival of armed tactical officers to drag me away. The agent assigned to the monitor did none of those things. He sat, slouched in an ergonomic mesh chair, radiating profound bureaucratic boredom. His eyes glazed over as he stared at the endless parade of neck pillows, laptops, and travel-sized shampoos. When my luggage glided across his screen, he barely blinked. Dual-energy X-ray systems easily differentiate between dense metals and compressed organic compounds. He recognized the solid dark shape for what it was, a common culinary tool. Not a threat, not a weapon, not a compressed brick of illicit currency wrapped in industrial plastic. The agent reached for a plastic bottle, took a slow sip of water, and let the belt continue its relentless forward march. The rubber flaps on the exit side of the scanner parted. My suitcase rolled out into the bright terminal lighting, untouched and unflagged. The sheer physical impossibility of what Carter just witnessed fractured his mind in an instant. He possessed a visceral memory of wedging a 3-pound package of federal crimes into that exact compartment. He had felt the weight. He had zipped the lining shut with his own hands. The mathematical variables of his brilliant scheme were flawless, yet the outcome defied the fundamental laws of reality. The snare he had so carefully engineered had evaporated like morning mist on hot pavement. I watched the cognitive dissonance hit his nervous system. His knees buckled under the weight of his collapsing reality. He took a staggering backward step, his polished leather loafers slipping wildly on the slick terrazzo floor. Losing his balance, he crashed hard into a towering stack of gray plastic screening bins. The collision sent a dozen trays clattering across the checkpoint with a sharp, chaotic racket that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Fellow passengers turned to stare at the wealthy executive flailing in the middle of the priority lane. But Carter did not notice their judging glares. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of wet ash. A frantic, primal terror replaced the arrogant smirk he had worn since we left our driveway. He clutched at his throat, his fingers clawing desperately at the knot of his expensive silk tie, as if the fabric were actively strangling him. He was gasping for oxygen, pulling in shallow, ragged breaths that did nothing to fill his constricting lungs. His wide, bloodshot eyes darted from the bored security agent to the empty rubber flaps of the machine, and finally, to me. My background in corporate compliance taught me that the most effective way to break a liar is to let their own assumptions consume them. I did not need to hurl accusations across the terminal to secure my victory. I simply needed to let him drown in the agonizing silence of his own failure. An auditor learns to strip away emotion, treating panic as a useless, blinding variable. You observe the subject. You monitor their baseline behaviors and document their deviations. Carter was deviating wildly from his baseline. Every physical tell was a data point confirming his total psychological ruin. I stepped gracefully through the metal detector. The magnetic sensors remained perfectly silent, confirming my pristine, untouchable status. I strolled over to the stainless steel collection zone, projecting the aura of a relaxed traveler eager for a tropical vacation. I retrieved my oversized leather tote, slipping my laptop back into its designated sleeve. I slung my winter coat over my forearm and gripped the telescopic handle of the navy blue bag. The hidden steel block provided a comforting, reassuring heft. Across the security lane, Carter was still hyperventilating against the wall. His tailored charcoal suit looked suddenly wrinkled and oversized on his trembling frame. He stared at me, searching my face for any hints of comprehension, any sign that I understood the catastrophic failure of his plot. I offered nothing but sunshine. I tilted my head slightly, curved my lips into a sweet, oblivious smile, and gave him a gentle, encouraging wave. That small, cheerful gesture was the final blow to his crumbling sanity. It reinforced his worst fear. In his fractured state of mind, I was not a calculating investigator who had outsmarted him. I was still the naive, docile housewife he had manipulated for a year. Which meant the disappearance of his stolen fortune and forged documents was an inexplicable, terrifying mystery. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, unable to speak, unable to run, and unable to retrieve the very evidence that could send him to a penitentiary. He was effectively paralyzed by his own hubris. The quiet triumph expanding in my chest was profound. For 12 long months, he had engineered a campaign of mental sabotage designed to make me question my own memory. He hid my keys, deleted calendar appointments, and convinced me the stress of my former career was causing auditory hallucinations. He required my fragility to mask his treason. Now, the architect of my supposed insanity was the one losing his grip on the physical world. I watched his chest heave, noting the erratic pulse visible in his neck. His reality was unraveling, thread by thread, and I was the one holding the scissors. I adjusted my grip on the oversized tote bag, ensuring the leather strap rested comfortably on my shoulder. The transition from victim to executioner felt seamless. The airport terminal around us continued its chaotic rhythm, blind to the silent war concluding in priority lane number 4. Business travelers rushed past, grabbing their briefcases and rushing toward their gates. The mundane reality of morning travel provided a perfect contrasting backdrop to Carter's internal apocalypse. While Carter suffocated under the weight of his ruined plans, the true danger still lurked just a few feet away. Paige stood in the designated staging area, deeply annoyed by the sudden loud commotion. The junior executive assistant possessed none of Carter's calculating caution. She operated on pure, unearned entitlement, believing her youth and her stolen luxury shielded her from consequence. She adjusted the collar of her mink coat, huffing loudly as she glared at her boss, shivering on the floor. She had no patience for his erratic behavior. The display of weakness repulsed her. Their relationship was entirely transactional, built on the promise of offshore accounts and Caribbean villas. Seeing the man who was supposed to fund her lavish future crumbling in a public airport only fueled her irritation. She was ready to board a first-class flight and sip champagne over the Gulf of Mexico. She had zero interest in managing a panic attack. Grabbing her custom monogrammed calfskin duffel, she shoved it forcefully onto the metal rollers. She pushed the designer luggage toward the dark, gaping mouth of the scanning tunnel, treating the federal checkpoint as a mere inconvenience in her glamorous itinerary. Her painted nails tapped impatiently against the stainless steel table as she waited her turn to walk through the body scanner. I anchored my feet to the terrazzo floor, preparing for the inevitable eruption of sirens and shouting. The decoy had played its part flawlessly, and the primary target was now entering the strike zone. The dense leather pouch I had relocated into her bag held the exact profile the transportation security agent was trained to identify. A tightly packed, vacuum-sealed brick of currency presents a very specific organic signature on an X-ray monitor. It looks entirely different from a block of steel. The silent phase of my retaliation was officially over. The noisy, chaotic reckoning was seconds away. I stood at the end of the collection belt, my breathing steady and my gaze fixed on the screening station. I was waiting for the board agent to look at his glowing screen and realize a colossal federal felony was rolling right through his machine. The trap had been reset, and the true culprit was eagerly walking straight into the jaws of the justice system. A sharp, authoritative command shattered the trance holding Carter captive. "Sir, collect your items and step away from the screening area. You are blocking the flow of traffic." A uniformed agent pointed a firm finger toward the collection bins. Carter flinched, his shoulders jerking as if struck by a physical blow. He blinked rapidly, his glazed eyes struggling to focus on the reality of the terminal. He looked like a man waking up in a strange room, disoriented and stripped of his power. He stumbled forward on trembling legs, blindly gathering his briefcase and suit jacket with uncoordinated, erratic movements. Paige observed his erratic display with profound disdain. Her polished veneer of the sophisticated executive assistant vanished, revealing the petulant, entitled core beneath. She had spent the last 8 months enjoying the lavish perks of a shadow partnership, sipping vintage champagne and penthouse suites funded by pilfered procurement budgets. She believed her association with a wealthy executive granted her immunity from the mundane inconveniences of ordinary life. Managing a hyperventilating boss in a public space did not align with her glamorous itinerary. "Honestly, Carter, get it together," she hissed, her voice dripping with venomous irritation. "People are staring. You are embarrassing yourself." She stepped past him, gripping the gleaming gold handles of her custom calfskin duffel. With a dramatic huff, she hoisted the luggage and shoved it onto the stainless steel rollers. The bag glided forward, carrying the hidden weight of forged ledgers and stolen currency. Paige smoothed her hair, adjusted her mink coat, and strutted through the body scanner, radiating an aura of untouchable superiority. The conveyor belt hummed its steady tune, feeding the designer luggage into the dark tunnel of the X-ray machine. At the control console, the transportation security agent slouched in his mesh chair, stifling a yawn. He reached for his water bottle, his eyes drifting lazily across the glowing monitor. The neon image of Paige's bag materialized on the screen. Silks and cashmeres registered in soft, organic orange hues. A leather cosmetic pouch glowed green. But buried beneath those layers, flush against the reinforced bottom panel, rested a dense, geometric anomaly. The vacuum-sealed brick of currency presented a very specific, undeniable signature. It was a visual profile drilled into every federal screener during their academy training. The agent's bored demeanor evaporated in a fraction of a second. His spine snapped straight, pressing hard against the backrest of his chair. He dropped his water bottle. The plastic cylinder hit the floor, spilling liquid across the linoleum, but he did not notice. His eyes widened, locking onto the screen with a sudden, sharp intensity. His hand shot forward, hovering over the control panel for a fleeting moment of confirmation, before slamming down hard on the large red emergency stop button. The steady, mechanical hum of the conveyor belt died instantly. The steel rollers locked into place with a piercing metallic screech that tore through the ambient noise of the terminal. Then the alarms triggered. A high-pitched, pulsating siren erupted from the ceiling speakers, echoing off the vast glass windows and concrete pillars. Flashing strobe lights mounted above our specific lane began to spin, casting harsh, erratic shadows across the stunned faces of nearby travelers. The routine, bureaucratic atmosphere of the checkpoint shattered, replaced instantly by the electrified tension of an active homeland security threat. The invisible barrier between the mundane world and federal jurisdiction had been crossed. Paige stood on the opposite side of the scanner, her hands resting on her hips. The blaring sirens did not register as a danger to her. They registered as a personal inconvenience. She frowned, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together in deep indignation. She stepped toward the locked conveyor belt, glaring at the agent behind the console. "Excuse me," she demanded, her tone laced with staggering arrogance. "Why did you stop my bag in there? I have a first-class flight to catch." "Be careful with that. It is designer." The sheer, suffocating irony of her complaint hung heavy in the electrified air. She was demanding premium customer service for a piece of luggage holding a decade of mandatory prison time. She believed a spilled bottle of lotion or an oversized hairspray had triggered the lockdown. She remained blissfully oblivious to the impending doom rushing toward her. The agent did not respond to her demands. He picked up a red radio handset and barked a rapid sequence of codes. Within seconds, the perimeter of Lane 4 transformed. Uniformed officers materialized from adjacent checkpoints, moving with swift tactical precision. They formed a physical barricade, extending their arms and ordering the gathering crowd of bewildered passengers to step back and clear the immediate area. The standard blue shirts of the Transportation Administration were quickly joined by the dark, imposing uniforms of Customs and Border Protection. Heavy boots pounded against the terrazzo floor as a specialized response team swarmed the staging zone, isolating Paige and her trapped luggage. A commanding officer emerged from the tactical formation leading a muscular German shepherd on a tight, heavy-duty leather leash. The K-9 unit was not a passive detection dog. It was an explosive and narcotics response animal bred for high drive detection. The handler gave a sharp, guttural command. The dog surged forward, its claws scrambling for traction on the slick floor. It bypassed the bins of shoes and laptops, pulling the officer directly toward the stalled conveyor belt. The animal thrust its snout into the dark opening of the scanner, inhaling deeply. Its ears pinned back and its tail stiffened into a rigid line. The German shepherd let out a deafening, ferocious bark. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the tense terminal. The dog lunged at the rubber flaps, its front paws scratching frantically at the metal housing of the machine, fighting to reach the calfskin duffel trapped inside. It whined, barked again, and sat firmly back on its haunches. It was a textbook positive alert. The trained canine had detected the distinct chemical odor of the proprietary industrial seal and the lingering residue of illicit currency. The invisible trap had sprung, and the jaws were locked tight around the throat of the young executive assistant. Paige stumbled backward, her haughty posture crumbling into pure, unadulterated terror. She raised her hands to her mouth, her eyes darting wildly from the snapping jaws of the police dog to the stern faces of the approaching federal agents. The reality of her situation finally breached the fortress of her entitlement. She was no longer a pampered mistress headed for a tropical resort. She was a prime suspect in a high-stakes federal investigation. A few feet away, Carter stood frozen by the collection bins. His breath hitched in his throat, producing a ragged, wet wheeze. He stared at the German shepherd tearing at the entrance of the X-ray machine, then shifted his bloodshot gaze to the calfskin duffel visible through the side panel. The mathematical equation in his brain, the impossible puzzle that had paralyzed him moments earlier, finally clicked into place. The variables aligned. The dense pout of forged documents and stolen cash had not vanished. It had not been confiscated by invisible forces. It had simply changed addresses. Carter slowly turned his head to look at me. I stood on the periphery of the chaos, maintaining a serene, unbothered posture. I did not break eye contact. I did not feign shock or offer him a comforting nod. I simply watched the destruction of his empire with the cold, detached observation of a seasoned auditor finalizing a ledger. In that silent exchange, the horrifying truth crashed down upon him. He realized that the naive, fragile wife he had spent 12 months trying to break did not exist. I had audited his perfect trap. I had bypassed his security, intercepted his payload, and quietly rewritten the ending of his story. The predator had been outmaneuvered, led blindly into a snare of his own design. But the explosion was far from over. As the federal captain reached into the machine to extract the flagged luggage, Carter realized the blast radius was about to expand. He was the one who funded the trip. He was the one whose signature adorned the forged wire transfers hidden inside that bag. The instinct for self-preservation buried beneath layers of shock began to claw its way to the surface, setting the stage for a catastrophic public unraveling. An imposing figure stepped through the perimeter of tactical officers, projecting an aura of unwavering federal authority. The captain wore a crisp navy blue uniform adorned with gleaming brass insignias, his demeanor reflecting years spent dismantling sophisticated smuggling rings. He did not rush. His movements were deliberate and calculated, commanding the space without raising his voice. He approached the stalled conveyor belt and signaled for a subordinate to retrieve the flagged calfskin duffel from the belly of the scanning tunnel. The junior agent pulled the designer luggage onto the stainless steel inspection table. The captain donned a pair of black nitrile gloves. He did not ask for passcodes or permission. He gripped the golden zipper pulls and yanked the main compartment wide open. The overpowering scent of premium floral perfume wafted into the sterile airport air, but it did nothing to mask the gravity of the situation. The officer pushed aside tangled silk garments and a velvet cosmetic case, driving his hands straight toward the rigid structural base of the bag. His fingers located the hidden secondary compartment I had accessed just minutes prior. With a swift, practiced motion, the captain unzipped the lining. He reached deep into the cavity and extracted the dense, heavy package. He lifted it up into the unforgiving glare of the overhead fluorescent lights. The industrial vacuum seal caught the illumination, highlighting the tightly compressed stacks of $100 bills inside. Tucked beneath the clear plastic binding were the forged offshore banking ledgers. The evidence was undeniable. It was not a suspicious bottle of liquid or an undeclared piece of jewelry. It was a staggering volume of illicit currency paired with fraudulent financial documents, packaged with the clinical precision of a professional criminal enterprise. Paige stood a few feet away, her eyes locked onto the brick of cash. The color drained from her perfectly contoured face, leaving her skin a sickly pallid gray. Her haughty indignation evaporated, replaced instantly by sheer hysterical terror. For her brief tenure in the corporate world, the young executive assistant had navigated the landscape by attaching herself to powerful, wealthy men, assuming their influence would shield her from consequence. She traded her discretion for luxury, believing the corporate predators she served would always protect her. Now facing the cold reality of a federal trafficking and embezzlement charge, that illusion shattered. She took a frantic step backward, her designer heels skidding on the terrazzo floor. Her manicured hands trembled as she pointed a shaking finger directly at the man shivering near the plastic collection bins. "He is my boss!" she shrieked, her voice cracking into a shrill, desperate pitch. "He paid for the trip! He arranged everything! He packed that bag! I do not know anything about that money! He forced me to carry it!" In a singular, breathtaking moment of cowardice, she threw her lover to the wolves. The glamorous romance they had cultivated in penthouse suites and secluded resorts died right there on the linoleum. There was no loyalty among thieves. She was actively trying to save herself by burying the man who had funded her extravagant lifestyle. Carter did not fight back. He did not attempt to silence her or mount a defense. His spirit was already crushed beneath the weight of his own failed brilliance. The vice president of procurement, a man who built a lucrative career on extreme control and meticulous planning, simply broke. His knees buckled. He collapsed onto the hard floor, the fabric of his tailored trousers tearing against the sharp edge of a dropped screening bin. He wrapped his arms around his torso, rocking back and forth as profound panic hijacked his nervous system. His mind remained trapped in a devastating loop of cognitive dissonance. He knew the undeniable truth of his own actions. He remembered slicing open my luggage, placing the contraband inside and zipping it shut. The physical reality of the cash emerging from his mistress's bag defied every law of physics his brain could comprehend. The terror of his impending ruin eclipsed all rational thought. Primal fear overrode his instinct for self-preservation. He needed the nightmare to make sense, and in his desperate bid for logical clarity, he committed the most catastrophic error of his entire existence. "No, Carter," wailed, his voice raw and echoing across the hushed terminal. He scrambled forward on his hands and knees, pointing a sweaty, trembling finger at the sealed brick of currency held by the captain. "That is impossible. That is not supposed to be in there." The federal officer lowered the package slightly, his expression remaining an impenetrable mask of stoic observation. He waited, allowing the desperate suspect to dig his own grave. "That was supposed to be in my wife's bag!" Carter screamed, tears of sheer panic streaming down his flushed cheeks. "I put it in her suitcase. I packed it in her luggage. It is a mistake. You have the wrong bag." The entire security checkpoint plunged into a suffocating, profound silence. The murmuring crowds of delayed passengers ceased their whispering. The tactical officers froze. Paige covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with shock as the sheer magnitude of his admission registered. My husband had just confessed. In front of a dozen federal agents and countless civilian witnesses, he admitted to orchestrating a frame job. He declared his intention to plant illicit funds and forged documents on his spouse, handing the prosecution a perfect, unassailable verbal confession on a silver platter. The captain did not blink. He slowly reached up to the center of his tactical vest and tapped the blinking red light of his body camera, ensuring the audio and visual recording of the admission was permanently secured. "Thank you for clarifying the ownership of the evidence, sir," the officer stated, his baritone voice echoing with chilling finality. At his command, the tactical squad descended. 2 officers grabbed Carter by the shoulders, hauling him off the floor with ruthless efficiency. They slammed him chest first against the stainless steel inspection table, pinning his arms behind his back. The sharp, metallic ratcheting of steel handcuffs echoing through the terminal was the most exquisite symphony I had ever heard. Carter offered zero resistance. He went entirely limp, his chin resting against the cold metal, his eyes glazed and vacant. Simultaneously, a female border protection agent secured Paige's wrists. The young woman did not struggle, but she wept openly, her mascara running in dark, jagged streams down her pale cheeks. She sobbed, begging for a lawyer, pleading with anyone who would listen that she was merely a naive employee caught in a rich man's web. Her designer mink coat slipped from her shoulders, pooling on the dirty airport floor like a discarded rag. I remained anchored near the collection area, projecting an aura of pristine, unbothered innocence. I folded my hands neatly over the handle of my clean roller bag. I did not shed a tear. I did not scream or demand answers. I simply watched the authorities process the scene. Carter turned his head slightly, his cheek pressing against the table, seeking my gaze one final time before the officers pulled him away. He searched my face for any hint of shock or devastation. I offered him nothing but a serene, knowing tilt of my head. In that fleeting exchange, he understood the true depth of his failure. The officers hauled them both to their feet and began the long, humiliating perp walk through the concourse. The crowd of travelers parted, holding up smartphones to capture the wealthy executive and his weeping mistress being dragged away in disgrace. The flashing strobe lights painted their retreating figures in harsh, erratic bursts of red and blue. The physical trap had sprung flawlessly, ensnaring the exact prey I had targeted. Yet the execution was only half finished. The contraband at the checkpoint represented a mere fraction of the crimes Carter had committed against his employer. The cash was the bait, but the digital ledger I had secured contained the true poison. They were being escorted to a windowless holding cell deep within the bowels of the airport, believing their primary legal battle would center on the physical evidence found in the duffel. They had no idea that I was already preparing to follow them into that concrete room. I had dismantled his freedom, but now I needed to obliterate his remaining hope, setting the stage for a final, devastating revelation that would sever his corporate lifeline forever. The sterile atmosphere of the federal holding facility deep beneath the airport concourse carried the distinct scent of industrial bleach and stagnant despair. A sprawling one-way mirror dominated the wall of the interrogation room, reflecting the harsh, fluorescent lighting overhead. Inside this windowless concrete box, the grand illusion of a glamorous corporate romance had deteriorated into a feral, pathetic display of self-preservation. Carter and Paige sat bolted to opposite ends of a scarred steel table, their wrists bound by heavy iron cuffs attached to metal anchoring rings. They were no longer the sophisticated executive and the pampered assistant sipping vintage champagne in penthouse suites. They were cornered animals, tearing at each other with unvarnished hatred. "You told me it was just a simple transit favor," Paige shrieked, her voice echoing sharply off the cinder block walls. Her mascara-smeared eyes darted around the confined space, searching for an escape that did not exist. "You promised I would not carry any risk. You dragged me into a federal trafficking ring, you arrogant fool!" Carter glared at her, his face flushed with a volatile cocktail of humiliation and unbridled rage. "You greedy parasite," he spat, his voice dropping into a venomous hiss. "You enjoyed every single luxury those diverted funds bought. You signed the incorporation documents for the shell companies. Do not dare play the naive victim now. You are just as guilty as I am, and I will make sure the prosecutor knows it." Their mutual animosity poisoned the small room. The transactional nature of their partnership lay exposed, stripped of the designer clothing and tropical itineraries. They were actively turning on one another, eager to trade the other's freedom for a reduced sentence. The heavy steel door clicked the deadbolt, disengaging with a loud, resounding clack. The bitter bickering ceased instantly. Both suspects snapped their heads toward the threshold, desperate to see a public defender or an investigating agent step through the frame. Instead, I walked into the harsh light. I wore no handcuffs. My posture was pristine, unburdened, and entirely free. Flanking my right side was Victoria, a formidable corporate defense attorney known throughout the Midwest for dismantling fraudulent executives with surgical precision. She carried a sleek leather briefcase and an aura of indisputable legal authority. Carter stared at me, his jaw slacking as the last flickering ember of his lingering hope extinguished. He realized I was not brought in for questioning as a bewildered spouse. I was standing there as the architect of his demise. I walked toward the center of the room, my heels clicking a steady rhythmic tempo against the linoleum floor. I did not raise my voice. I did not hurl emotional accusations or demand tearful apologies. I reached into my oversized tote bag and extracted a thick, color-coded audit portfolio. The binder was a masterpiece of forensic accounting, categorized with neon tabs and pristine spreadsheets detailing a sprawling financial crime. I let it drop onto the scratched metal table. The impact produced a dull, heavy thud that silenced the room. Carter stared at the document, his throat swallowing dryly. He recognized the formatting. It was the exact style I used when presenting quarterly risk assessments to corporate boards during my tenure as an investigator. "Your midnight encryption was amateurish, Carter," I stated, my tone conversational yet laced with lethal clarity. "It took my ghost server less than 7 minutes to bypass your digital locks. I found the fabricated emails you planned to use against me, the ones painting me as the mastermind of your supply chain embezzlement scheme." I paused, letting the reality of my network intrusion wash over him. He slumped forward, the iron cuffs rattling against the table as his shoulders sagged. "I deleted those files," I continued, "and then I dug deeper into your home network. I bypassed the superficial firewalls and located the authentic master ledger. Every phantom vendor, every diverted invoice, and every hidden transaction you orchestrated over the past 3 years is indexed right here in this binder." Carter closed his eyes, squeezing them shut as if trying to wake up from a terminal nightmare. He understood the gravity of the portfolio. The physical currency intercepted upstairs at the security checkpoint was merely a symptom of the disease. I had documented the entire $6 million infection, but my execution strategy required one final turn of the blade. I opened the binder, pulled out a single sheet of printed paper, and slid it across the cold steel surface until it rested inches from his bound hands. "You thought you were the smartest person in the room," I said, maintaining my even, relentless cadence. "You believed you were framing your naive wife to escape to a tropical paradise with a devoted younger woman. But you failed to audit your own accomplice." Carter opened his eyes and looked down at the document. It was a printed smart contract, a highly complex digital agreement governing the distribution of the offshore funds. He squinted at the lines of code and routing numbers, his brow furrowing in confusion. I shifted my gaze toward Paige. She sat frozen, her breath hitching in her throat. The remaining color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll on the verge of shattering. Those Cayman holding accounts are not joint ventures, I explained, keeping my eyes locked on the trembling young woman. Paige registered the offshore entities exclusively under her own name. She used a proxy server to hide the ownership credentials from you. Furthermore, she installed a geographic trigger in the routing software. Carter lifted his head, his bloodshot eyes darting between me and the printed contract. The moment your flight connected to the cellular towers in Cabo San Lucas, this contract would execute a total security lockout, I revealed, letting the words hang in the sterile air. She was going to drain the primary vaults, sever your access credentials, and transfer the stolen fortune into a secondary, untraceable account. She planned to leave you stranded in Mexico with nothing but the clothes on your back and a federal warrant waiting for you at the border. Carter froze. The ambient hum of the ventilation system seemed to amplify in the deafening silence of the interrogation room. He slowly turned his head, fixing his gaze on the woman sitting across from him. The horrifying realization settled deep into his bones. He had destroyed his marriage, obliterated his lucrative career, and forfeited his freedom for a partner who was actively planning to rob him blind. Paige shrank back against her metal chair, unable to formulate a single word of denial. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. The printed smart contract was irrefutable proof of her extreme greed. She had played the role of the submissive, adoring assistant while quietly engineering a digital heist designed to ruin him. The betrayers had betrayed each other. Carter let out a low, agonizing groan, a sound born of profound regret and staggering humiliation. He stared at Paige with a visceral, unvarnished disgust. He had burned down his entire world for a mirage. The tropical fantasy he had used to justify his treason was nothing more than a secondary trap set by a woman who viewed him as a stepping stone rather than a savior. I stood over them, observing the spectacular ruins of their alliance. The glamorous facade was entirely stripped away, leaving only two greedy, foolish criminals bound to a steel table. Yet the physical evidence resting on the interrogation table was only a localized victory. I had cornered them in the airport, but my retaliation extended far beyond the confines of Chicago O'Hare. As they sat processing their mutual deception in the bowels of the terminal, a much larger, far more destructive storm was brewing, hundreds of miles away, in our home state. The digital trap I set hours prior was already triggering a cascade of catastrophic consequences. Carter was about to discover that his personal ruin in this concrete room was merely a prelude to a sprawling corporate takedown, one that would reduce his professional legacy to ash. Carter leaned his torso forward, the heavy iron chain of his restraints grinding a harsh metallic rhythm against the scarred table. The fierce arrogance that had defined his entire executive persona had vanished, replaced by a desperate, sweaty sheen of primal panic. His chest heaved as he struggled to draw oxygen into his constricting lungs. "We can fix this, Madison," he pleaded, his voice cracking and fracturing under the immense strain of his ruined reality. "I will give you everything. The estate in Milwaukee, the retirement portfolios, every single dollar we have in domestic accounts. You can take it all. Just destroy the drive. Tell the authorities it was a misunderstanding." He still clung to the delusion that he could negotiate his way out of an execution. He genuinely thought his wealth and status could purchase a clean slate, just as it had always insulated him from the consequences of his actions in the corporate sector. During his steady ascent to vice president of procurement, Carter had built a reputation for buying off problematic suppliers and burying compliance violations under mountains of hush money. He assumed I possessed a convenient price tag. He assumed the devastation of my marriage and the attempted assassination of my character could be rectified with a property deed and a padded bank account. I did not laugh. I did not scoff at his pathetic attempt to bribe the woman he had spent 12 long months trying to destroy. I simply stood there, projecting a glacial detachment that mirrored the freezing temperatures outside the terminal. I raised my left wrist and glanced at the sleek silver face of my watch. The polished hands indicated it was creeping past 9 in the morning. "I do not possess the only copy, Carter," I stated, my tone devoid of any lingering sympathy or warmth. "The flash drive, resting on this table, is merely a visual aid." His frantic bargaining ceased. The rapid movement of his eyes halted. He blinked, a fresh layer of profound dread washing over his pale features. He stared at me, his jaw slacking as his mind struggled to process the implications of my statement. At 6 o'clock this morning, I continued pacing slowly across the narrow concrete room, my heels clicking a steady cadence against the linoleum. While you were sipping your premium roast coffee in our kitchen and subtly testing the weight of the decoy hidden in my luggage, my ghost server initiated a pre-programmed sequence. I established an automated encrypted transfer protocol. The unredacted master ledgers, the offshore routing numbers, and the undeniable digital footprint of your phantom vendors were bundled into a comprehensive dossier. I stopped pacing and anchored my stance directly in front of him, forcing him to meet my gaze. That dossier was transmitted simultaneously to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Financial Crimes Unit of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the personal inboxes of every single sitting member on your board of directors. Carter stopped breathing. The remaining color drained from his face until his skin resembled wet chalk. While he sat handcuffed in a windowless holding cell in Chicago fighting over an intercepted bag of cash, the shockwave of my digital detonation was actively tearing through his empire 200 miles north. I painted the picture for him, letting my precise words construct the devastating reality he could not see. Right at this very moment, the sprawling campus of his heavy machinery manufacturing firm in Wisconsin was under federal siege. The snowy tranquility of the corporate headquarters had been shattered by the sudden, coordinated arrival of a dozen unmarked black sport utility vehicles. Federal agents wearing tactical windbreakers were swarming the lobby, securing the exits, and seizing control of the facility. Confused and terrified employees were being ushered out of the building, standing, shivering in the freezing winter air as investigators locked down the premises. Inside his plush corner office, forensic technicians were dismantling his professional life, piece by piece. They were seizing the corporate servers, ripping hard drives from the mainframes, and confiscating years of archived emails. The chief financial officer, a man who had trusted Carter implicitly and championed his promotions, was likely standing in the hallway, watching decades of corporate reputation disintegrate in real time as federal warrants were executed across the entire procurement department. The destruction extended far beyond the physical office building. Federal mandates move with terrifying speed when presented with irrefutable, neatly packaged evidence of interstate fraud. By the time Carter had stepped through the airport metal detector earlier that morning, his pristine financial network was already collapsing. Warrants to freeze his assets had been issued and served. His premium checking accounts, his diversified investment portfolios, and his hidden domestic safety nets were locked tight by government injunctions. His lucrative career, built on a foundation of lies and supply chain manipulation, was reduced to ash before he even realized it was burning. "You are not just facing a local smuggling charge," I told him, ensuring every syllable landed with maximum impact. "You are not going to plea bargain a simple misunderstanding over a bag of intercepted cash. You are looking at decades in a federal penitentiary for grand-scale corporate fraud, wire fraud, and international money laundering. The realization crashed down upon him like a falling concrete pillar. The psychological fortress he had constructed around his own ego shattered into invisible dust. For a year, he had looked at me and seen a naive, fragile housewife. He had systematically isolated me, forcing me to abandon a demanding compliance career because he claimed the intense stress was fracturing my sanity. He had patted my head, kissed my forehead, and told me I was losing my grip on reality. He genuinely believed he had subdued a brilliant mind, reducing me to a convenient, obedient prop in his domestic theater. Now the sheer scale of my retaliation proved how spectacularly he had miscalculated. I had not just survived his prolonged mental sabotage, I had weaponized my isolation. I used the quiet, solitary hours in our snowy estate to map his entire criminal network. I audited his life, dismantled his offshore sanctuaries, and engineered a flawless federal takedown of his corporate dynasty. The wife he deemed too fragile to handle simple accounting stress had just delivered a fatal blow to a multi-million-dollar embezzlement ring. The profound humiliation of being so thoroughly outplayed broke his spirit entirely. He slumped forward against the table, a ruined shell of the arrogant executive who had strutted through the departure lounge just an hour prior. Beside him, Paige was experiencing a different variant of terminal shock. The young executive assistant had stopped hurling venomous accusations at her former lover. The fighting spirit drained from her posture, leaving only a hollow, weeping husk. She rested her forehead against the cold steel table, sobbing with a pathetic, gasping rhythm. Her meticulously crafted plans had evaporated into the sterile air. The tropical paradise she had envisioned, the sun-drenched beaches of Cabo San Lucas, where she planned to sip champagne and steal her lover's fortune, was permanently replaced by the harsh reality of a concrete holding cell. She had traded her youth and her freedom for a mirage. Her designer clothing and expensive perfumes offered zero protection against a federal indictment. The silence in the room stretched, punctuated only by the sound of Paige weeping and Carter pulling in ragged, shallow breaths. The air was thick with the undeniable scent of their impending ruin. Yet the survival instinct of a cornered predator rarely extinguishes without a final, desperate thrash. Carter lifted his heavy head from the table. His eyes, rimmed with red and devoid of their former sharp intelligence, locked onto mine. The bargaining phase had failed. The reality of his federal exposure was unquestionable. But his mind, frantic for any semblance of mitigation, began searching for a scapegoat. If he could not buy his way out, and he could not run, he needed to redirect the fury of the justice system. He slowly turned his head, his gaze shifting from my face to the sobbing woman chained beside him, his jaw tightening as a new, desperate strategy began to form. Carter's desperate mind frantically scrambled for a lifeline. The imposing walls of the concrete holding cell seemed to close in around him, suffocating his grandiose illusions. He shifted his weight, testing the limits of the heavy iron chain securing his wrist to the bolted metal table. His polished leather shoes scrambled against the scuffed linoleum, searching for purchase as he slid out of his chair. The metal links groaned and rattled, a stark acoustic reminder of his new reality. He dropped to his knees, sinking as low as the restraints would permit, his expensive, tailored trousers pooling awkwardly on the dirty floor. Tears streamed down his flushed cheeks, mixing with a thick sheen of nervous perspiration. The dignified vice president of procurement evaporated, leaving behind a weeping, terrified shell of a man, begging for mercy from the woman he had tried to destroy. "I was pressured, Madison," he pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. His bloodshot eyes locked onto mine, brimming with manufactured desperation. You know how the board operates. They demanded impossible profit margins this quarter. They squeezed my department dry, expecting miracles while slashing the budget. I had no choice. I was forced to create those vendor accounts to offset the deficits. They made me do it. Please, you have to believe me. He paused, gasping for air, before pivoting his desperate narrative toward the sobbing woman chained across from him. And Paige, he continued, his tone dripping with sudden venomous betrayal. She manipulated the transfers. She handled the offshore routing. I was just trying to keep the supply chain afloat. I am a victim of corporate greed, Madison. You know me. You know I would never intentionally put you in harm's way. I was just trying to protect our future. I stood above him, looking down at the crumbling architect of my prolonged nightmare. Throughout our marriage, Carter possessed an uncanny ability to shift the blame-dodging accountability with the practiced grace of a seasoned politician. When the housing market crashed shortly after we purchased our first estate, it was the fault of a dishonest broker. When he missed pivotal family events, he blamed incompetent assistants for mismanaging his calendar. Accountability was a foreign concept to his ego. He genuinely believed that if he spun a compelling enough narrative, the universe would bend to accommodate his lies. He expected me to nod, offer a sympathetic embrace, and help him clean up his mess. He spent an entire year attempting to dismantle my sanity. He isolated me in our snowy Wisconsin home, hiding my personal belongings, gaslighting my memories, and convincing our mutual friends that my high-stress career in compliance auditing had triggered a psychological breakdown. He methodically painted me as a fragile, paranoid burden, laying the groundwork to ensure no one would question my sudden arrest for international smuggling. He weaponized my trust, turning the sanctuary of our marriage into a psychological prison. I did not offer him a sympathetic embrace. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance until the tips of my boots nearly touched his knees. The windowless interrogation room was heavily monitored. A domed security camera rested in the upper corner, its red recording light blinking a steady, rhythmic pulse. Microphones embedded in the ceiling captured every rustle of fabric and every ragged breath. I needed the federal record to reflect my pristine composure. I needed the audio logs to capture the exact moment I severed the final thread of his lingering hope. I leaned down, bringing my face mere inches from his tear-streaked cheek. He stopped speaking, his breath catching in his throat as he waited for a reprieve, a sign of forgiveness or a promise to retract the digital dossier I had unleashed upon his firm. He smelled of stale sweat and bitter panic. "You are just imagining things, Carter," I whispered, ensuring my tone was soft, melodic, and devastatingly precise. "You are losing your grip." The psychological victory landed with the force of a physical blow. Those were his words. That was the exact patronizing phrase he had deployed countless times to dismiss my concerns, invalidate my intuition, and force me to question my own reality. Hearing his own favored weapon turned against him, delivered with chilling, serene clarity, broke whatever fragile resolve remained in his chest. His eyes widened, pupils dilating as the hollow realization settled into his bones. I had never lost my mind. I had never surrendered my intellect. I had simply stepped into the shadows, allowing him to believe his manipulation was successful, while I meticulously engineered his downfall. A choked, agonizing sob erupted from his throat. He bowed his head, his chin resting against his chest as profound defeat consumed him. His ego, the central pillar of his identity, fractured beyond repair. He was trapped in a federal holding cell, facing decades of incarceration, outsmarted by the very woman he deemed too weak to perceive his treason. I stood up, smoothly rising to my full height. I reached down and adjusted the lapels of my winter coat, brushing an invisible speck of dust from the wool fabric. My posture remained flawless, embodying the unyielding strength he had so foolishly underestimated. "I never needed you to be perfect," I told him, my voice echoing clearly off the cinderblock walls, ensuring the recording devices captured my final declaration. "Marriage requires compromise, and I was always willing to navigate your flaws. But your choice to weaponize my life, to frame me for your own staggering greed, means I owe you nothing." He tried to lift his head, his mouth opening to form another desperate plea, but I did not afford him the luxury of an audience. I executed a crisp, definitive turn, pivoting on my heel, and walked toward the heavy steel door. My footsteps rang out with rhythmic finality. I reached for the thick metal handle, pressing the release latch. "Madison, wait!" he shrieked, his voice straining over the clattering iron chains. "Please, do not leave me here!" I stepped over the threshold into the bright, bustling corridor of the federal detention area. I pulled the heavy door shut behind me. The thick steel slammed into the frame with a resounding, definitive thud, instantly silencing his frantic apologies and the pathetic sobbing of his former mistress. The sudden quiet of the hallway felt like a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. The toxic atmosphere of the interrogation room was sealed away, leaving me standing in a sterile, brightly lit space that smelled of lemon cleaner and fresh coffee. Victoria, my powerhouse corporate defense attorney, stood waiting near a row of metal filing cabinets. She held her sleek leather briefcase, her posture radiating professional triumph. She had observed the entire exchange through the one-way mirror, ensuring my legal standing remained unimpeachable. Our eyes met, and a subtle knowing smile touched the corners of her mouth. "Is the execution concluded?" Victoria asked, her tone reflecting a deep mutual respect. "The ledger is balanced," I replied, offering a calm, satisfied nod. She extended her hand. I grasped it, feeling the firm, reassuring grip of a brilliant ally. We turned in unison and began the long walk through the sprawling concourse of Chicago O'Hare. We bypassed the chaotic security checkpoints, the frantic holiday travelers, and the blaring departure announcements. My stride was light, propelled by a soaring sense of liberation that I had not experienced in over a year. We approached the towering glass exit doors. The automated sensors detected our presence, sliding the heavy panes apart to reveal the sprawling pickup lanes. I stepped out into the crisp, biting Chicago winter wind. The freezing air rushed past my face, carrying the sharp scent of jet fuel and impending snow. It was a harsh, unforgiving climate, but to me, it felt incredibly pure. I inhaled a deep, steadying breath, filling my lungs with the cold, bracing reality of my restored independence. The suffocating burden of Carter's deceit, the relentless paranoia, and the crushing isolation were left behind, locked away in a concrete box beneath the terminal. I stood on the curb, a free, wealthy, and vindicated woman, entirely unburdened. The storm I had weathered was over, and the path forward was clear, paving the way for a triumphant return to the very corporate arena my husband had attempted to steal from me. The transition from the frantic energy of the airport terminal to the profound stillness of my Wisconsin estate felt surreal. Several weeks passed, allowing the chaotic dust of that fateful morning to fully settle. I sat on the expansive cedar wraparound porch of my home, a warm ceramic mug of dark roast coffee resting between my palms. The frigid morning air bit at my cheeks, carrying the sharp pine-scented chill unique to the northern woodlands. Before me stretched a vast, peacefully frozen inland lake, its surface a flawless sheet of pristine white ice. The silence was deep and comforting, punctuated only by the occasional sharp crack of shifting ice echoing through the barren oak trees. I inhaled the crisp winter air, feeling a profound sense of restoration expand within my chest. The legal dissolution of my marriage proceeded with breathtaking velocity. When one party is sitting in a federal detention center facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence, the typical drawn-out divorce battles evaporate. Victoria processed the paperwork with surgical efficiency. Carter possessed zero leverage. His premium banking portfolios, his stock options, and his hidden domestic safety nets remained under strict government injunction. He lacked the financial resources to hire private counsel, relying instead on a frantic, overwhelmed public defender who urged him to sign whatever documents crossed his steel desk. The judge granted the divorce uncontested. The sprawling property, the vehicles, and the clean domestic accounts were transferred exclusively into my name. The man who had sought to leave me rotting in a foreign prison had effectively handed me the keys to his entire kingdom. The criminal fallout unfolding in Chicago proved equally satisfying. Federal prosecutors operated with ruthless precision, utilizing the comprehensive digital dossier I had provided to construct an airtight case. The media caught wind of the scandal, broadcasting the spectacular downfall of a prominent industry executive across the evening news networks. Carter faced a staggering roster of charges spanning wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. His frantic attempts to blame the board of directors crumbled when investigators cross-referenced his personal hard drives. Page fared no better. The young executive assistant attempted to negotiate a leniency deal, offering to testify against her former lover in exchange for immunity. The prosecuting attorneys quickly rejected her proposal. The printed smart contract I had retrieved from their digital vault served as the final nail in her coffin. The encrypted code proved she was not a coerced employee following orders, but a willing architect of a separate financial heist designed to rob her co-conspirator. She traded her designer luggage and mink coats for an orange jumpsuit, learning the hard way that arrogance offers zero protection in a federal courtroom. The betrayers were caged, left to rot in the miserable reality of their own making. As I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, bitter flavor, the distinct crunch of tires gripping fresh snow broke the morning tranquility. I lowered my mug and watched a sleek black luxury sedan roll up my winding driveway. The vehicle parked near the stone walkway. A tall, distinguished man in a tailored charcoal overcoat stepped out into the biting cold. I recognized him instantly. He was the chief executive officer of the heavy machinery firm, the man who had previously championed Carter's rise through the corporate ranks. I did not retreat inside. I remained seated on the porch, my posture relaxed, projecting the quiet authority of a woman who held all the cards. The executive walked up the wooden steps, his breath forming small white clouds in the freezing air. He stopped a respectful distance away, removing his leather gloves. He looked tired, his face bearing the heavy stress of a corporate dynasty struggling to contain a sprawling scandal. We did not exchange pleasantries. He looked at me with a mixture of deep respect and lingering astonishment. Our internal auditor spent the last 3 years reviewing the procurement division, he said, his voice carrying a weary resonance. We paid elite firms hundreds of thousands of dollars to ensure our ledgers were pristine. They found nothing. They rubber-stamped every single phantom vendor Carter created. You bypassed his encryption, traced the offshore routing, and mapped his entire criminal network in a single night. I offered a subtle, knowing nod. A formal audit relies on predictable patterns, I replied. Carter knew exactly how to manipulate the algorithm because he knew what the firms were programmed to seek. I did not look for missing money. I looked for the human flaw in the system. The executive sighed, leaning against the wooden railing. The board is in a state of panic. Our stock is taking a hit, and our shareholders are demanding total transparency. We are bleeding credibility, and the current compliance department is paralyzed. We need someone who understands the architecture of this fraud better than the man who built it. He reached into the inner pocket of his overcoat and produced a thick, cream-colored envelope. He placed it on the small patio table next to my coffee mug. "We want you back in the arena," he stated. "The board authorized me to offer you the position of elite private consultant. You will report directly to me. You will have unrestricted authority to gut the procurement division, rewrite our compliance protocols, and build a firewall that no executive can ever breach." I looked down at the envelope, the tangible proof of my ultimate vindication. Carter had spent a year insisting the high-stress environment of compliance auditing was destroying my mind. He demanded I quit isolating me in this house so I could play the role of a docile, obedient prop. He sought to strip away my professional identity, assuming I would simply fade into domestic obscurity. Now, the very corporation he had defrauded was arriving at my doorstep, pleading for my intellect to save their sinking ship. I let the silence stretch, allowing the winter wind to rustle the bare oak branches. I reached out and tapped the thick paper with my index finger. "I require total autonomy," I informed him, my tone uncompromising and sharp. "I will not seek board approval for terminations within the department, and my findings will not be filtered through a legal review before they reach your desk. Furthermore, my consulting fee will be exactly double the salary you previously paid your vice president of procurement." The executive did not flinch. He did not attempt to negotiate or stall. He simply nodded, a look of profound relief washing over his tired features. "Draft the contract," he agreed without hesitation. "We need your mind on our side." He offered a respectful bow of his head turned and walked back down the snowy steps. I watched the luxury sedan reverse down the driveway and disappear down the rural road, leaving me alone once more with the frozen lake and the quiet Wisconsin morning. I picked up my coffee mug, the ceramic radiating a comforting heat against my palms. A deep, resonant sense of triumph settled into my bones. The narrative Carter tried to write for me had been burned to ash, and from those embers, I had forged an empire of my own design. Marriages do not break overnight in a sudden dramatic explosion. They erode, slowly, poisoned by small, calculated betrayals and silent disrespect. When someone you trust attempts to weaponize your life, the natural instinct is to scream, to cry, and to demand explanations that will never come. But true superiority is found in the stillness. It is not about dodging the knives thrown by those closest to you. It is about possessing the absolute clarity and intellect to catch the blade in midair, turn it around, and walk away with your integrity fully intact. I took a final, slow sip of the dark roast coffee. The bitter warmth grounded me in the beautiful reality of the present moment. I smiled at the winter horizon, watching the morning sun illuminate the sprawling sheet of white ice. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine, untouched landscape. I was fully in control, standing at the threshold of a brilliant, highly lucrative future that finally belonged entirely to me. The frozen inland lakes of Wisconsin offer a quiet, mirror-like surface that reflects the harsh beauty of the winter sky. Looking out over that pristine expanse, it is easy to believe in the illusion of perfect stillness. Yet beneath the thick ice, currents continue to pull, unseen and unforgiving. The story of Madison and Carter, a tale of corporate treason, a framed wife, and a digital guillotine dropping at an airport security checkpoint, is thrilling. Yet it serves as a profound mirror for a much deeper, quieter tragedy. Beyond the dramatic luggage swaps and the flashing lights of federal agents, This narrative is fundamentally a cautionary tale about the roots of human character. It is a stark reflection on the catastrophic consequences of failing our most sacred duty, the moral and emotional guidance of the next generation. In American culture, the traditional family structure is often heralded as a sanctuary. We idealize the image of the successful provider, the beautiful home in the suburbs, and the quiet comfort of a life well earned. Carter possessed all the trappings of this American dream. He was a vice president, a man of influence and wealth who wore tailored suits and spoke with practiced confidence. But his polished exterior was merely a veneer, masking a hollow core, devoid of honesty, fairness, and empathy. The terrifying reality is that men like Carter are not born in corporate boardrooms. They are raised at kitchen tables. When we look at a man who can look his wife in the eye, kiss her forehead, and knowingly send her to rot in a foreign prison to save his own skin, we must ask ourselves a chilling question. What was he taught about love and consequence when he was a child? Raising children within a traditional family structure carries an immense, sacred responsibility. It is not enough to provide shelter, education, and opportunity. If we prioritize external achievement over internal integrity, we risk raising individuals who view the people around them not as equals, but as tools to be used and discarded. Carter's fatal flaw was not his greed, but his profound lack of emotional awareness. He lacked the capacity to step outside his own ego and recognize the humanity of his partner. He believed that his status shielded him from accountability, a dangerous entitlement that almost certainly took root long before he ever held a corporate title. Parenting is the daily, relentless work of instilling fairness. It is the quiet moments where we teach a child that their desires do not supersede the rights of another. In a society that frequently rewards the loudest, the most ruthless, and the most cunning, it requires immense courage to raise a child who values honesty over a momentary advantage. We must teach our children that true strength is not found in manipulating others, but in the quiet, steadfast adherence to one's own moral compass, even when no one is watching. Madison's journey from an isolated, gaslit spouse to a triumphant architect of her own justice highlights the profound necessity of emotional awareness. For a year, she endured psychological sabotage, told repeatedly that she was losing her grip on reality. Her survival was not merely a product of her forensic auditing skills. It was born from a deep, unshakable trust in her own emotional truth. She knew her worth. She knew her mind. When we guide our children, particularly our daughters, we must actively nurture this internal fortitude. We must teach them that their perception is valid, that their boundaries are sacred, and that true love does not require the surrender of their sanity or their voice. The traditional family is meant to be the crucible where these virtues are forged. It is where a child should learn that fairness is not just a concept for the playground, but the bedrock of every intimate relationship. If a child grows up witnessing a dynamic where one partner is diminished, silenced, or treated as an accessory to another's success, the cycle of entitlement and subjugation continues. We break this cycle only through intentional, mindful guidance, modeling partnerships built on mutual respect and unwavering honesty. The heavy leather pouch hidden in Madison's suitcase was filled with stolen cash and forged documents. But metaphorically, it represents the toxic baggage of unchecked entitlement. When we fail to hold our children accountable, when we smooth over their deceit to protect their fragile egos, we are packing that same bag for them to carry into their adult lives. We are setting them on a path where they will inevitably harm others and ultimately destroy themselves. Carter's spectacular downfall was not a stroke of bad luck. It was the inevitable harvest of a life lived without the anchoring weight of moral responsibility. As we navigate the complexities of our own lives and relationships, these narratives serve as vital touchstones. They force us to look in the mirror and question the legacy we are leaving behind. If you find yourself reflecting on the hidden dynamics of your own life through these stories, if you seek to understand the delicate interplay of trust, betrayal, and human resilience, I invite you to subscribe and follow Samantha Told Stories. Here, we do more than just recount thrilling events. We unravel the complex threads of the human heart, seeking the truths that bind us together and illuminating the lies that tear us apart. Every family has its secrets, its silent agreements, and its hidden fractures. We spend our lives meticulously curating the image we present to the world, much like a traveler carefully packing a suitcase, ensuring only the finest garments rest on the surface. We are taught that the ultimate duty of a family is unconditional loyalty, to protect our own, to keep the peace, and to shield our children from the harsh judgments of the outside world. But perhaps this conventional wisdom is the very poison that sickens the roots of the family tree. We are led to believe that a successful home is one without conflict, a safe harbor where our loved ones are protected from the cold. But shielding a child from the consequences of their actions does not protect them. It merely delays their inevitable collision with reality. Unconditional love without unconditional accountability is the architect of a monster. The most profound, terrifying truth of family responsibility is not that we must build higher walls to keep the world out. It is that the walls do not keep the danger out. They lock it in with us. The ultimate act of love is not sacrificing your boundaries or your truth to maintain a fragile peace. The ultimate act of love, both for ourselves and for the children we raise, is having the terrifying courage to let that false peace shatter. For it is only when the illusions are broken that we can finally see what and who remains standing in the debris.